When we're talking or writing, we usually connect our ideas together between clauses and sentences, right? What is talking but just lots of different ideas jumping between two people? What is writing but lots of different ideas being pushed together into different paragraphs? What is other mediums? What's a presentation but lots of ideas organized in a linear way? What we say or write is related to what was said or written before it. Unless we're making a clean break and we're starting a new idea, which happens all the time too. Ideas are connected. And in a way, language is nothing more than just a bunch of ideas put together. Okay, hello, and welcome back to the Clark and Miller English podcast. And if this is your first time here, then just welcome. Good to have you here. Yes, we continue to grow according to these numbers that I see on the screen, which just seems very surreal. Loads of people on Spotify. Welcome, one and all. And good to see that some people kind of must be finding this at least interesting or something. Anyway, I do. So I'm going to keep doing it anyway. Before we get started, very quickly, don't forget to go to our website. If you're just a podcast listener, remember there's loads of free stuff you can get if you go to clarkandmiller.com. We've got a huge blog with almost 200 posts about all sorts of weird things. And if you have a look around the site, you'll be offered free books as well, with those sometimes quite annoying pop-up menus. Sorry about that. Check it out, clarkandmiller.com. Loads and loads of stuff for you to work on your English with. Today is going to be quite a weird one. The beginning sounds like a classic sort of grammar question, because I did get a classic grammar question from one of our readers, Hannah from Vietnam, and it starts with what seems like a traditional sort of grammar analysis, I suppose. But as this podcast episode develops, it gets deeper and deeper into much more philosophical and interesting areas. And we talk about how language evolves. We talk about how grammar we don't always need grammar for meaning. You know, we have sentences like no shirt, no tie, no service without grammar. But what's going on there? How we begin sentences with old information and finish with new information, why we really use the passive, how language is just a bunch of ideas shoved together. So, like I said, the beginning of the episode is going to be very grammar-y, and frankly, if you're bored by that, just skip to about 15 minutes, and it starts to get a bit more trippy and interesting and introspective, and maybe controversial as well. Yes, I'm looking forward to some emails from people who disagree with me. Those are my favorite emails. Okay, anyway, so let's just get started. We're going to start with a letter from Hannah. Okay, here we go. Okay, so I'd like to start today by reading an email I got from one of our listeners or readers. I can't figure out where she knows us from, called Hannah from Vietnam. Here it is. I'll just start with Hannah, the beginning of Hannah's email. Dear Mr. Clark. Yeah, formal. I like it. I am Hannah from Vietnam. I have a question related to grammar, which I cannot find a satisfactory answer on the internet. So I have decided to ask you, my favorite English teacher. Oh, thank you, Hannah. I have been confused about the rules for reducing non-defining relative clauses. As far as I've been taught, we can reduce a relative clause by removing the relative pronoun and turning the main verb into V-ing form if the clause is active and past participle if the clause is passive. Okay, so what she's talking about here is when we take a sentence like, I watched the band who were playing Rammstein, and instead say, I watched the band playing Rammstein. Or, Yasemin, who was annoyed by all the shouting, left the party early, and instead say, Yasemin annoyed by all the shouting, left the party early. Yeah, you can see what's happening here, right? It's a neat little trick. It's kind of like a relative clause, but more casual, more just sort of casually giving a reason or some extra information about something. Like the band, they're playing Rammstein, extra information. Or Yasemin, she's annoyed by all the shouting, extra information. Okay, so far so good. Actually, we have got a blog post on this, which, this blog post we published ages ago, 2017, ing or to part 2, subjects, objects, and extra information. And in this blog post, we cover this reduced relative clause thing. But don't worry about it too much. It's just an example for now. And Hannah also goes on in her email to give these examples. 1. Brian, who wanted to make an impression on Anna, took her to a luxurious restaurant. And that becomes Brian, wanting to make an impression on Anna, took her to a luxurious restaurant. So Brian, who wanted, becomes Brian, wanting. And 2, our old house, which was built in 1920, collapsed last year. And that becomes our old house, built in 1920, collapsed last year. Right, I'm not going to go into the details of how to form these, but you get the idea of what's going on. Hannah goes on to point out why she's confused. And this is where Hannah's problem emerges. And this problem ended up being really interesting, and it kind of made me think about all sorts of other things. Things about English, things about language, things about the way we think as human beings, and things that make speaking English or any other language sort of easier in a way, because it's related to how we organize our thoughts. This email made me think about things that really make a connection between language and the human condition. How we organize our thoughts and our speech to communicate as effectively as possible. Things that really made me think about how amazingly advanced we are, but also somehow how communication can also be really simple. Language is so cool. Like, the more you learn about it, the more you realize it's super advanced, but also weirdly limited and simple at the same time. Fun things, interesting things, things that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But first, I want to cover some very quick terminology. Let's talk about the modifiers and the modified. God, that sounds like an 80s action film, doesn't it? The modifiers. What do? They go around changing people's faces? I don't know. Yeah, let's talk about the modifiers and the modified. The modifier is a thing that changes a thing. So in the phrase, a massive giraffe, massive is the modifier, the thing that's giving more information about something, and giraffe is the modified, right? So like you have a giraffe and then we say massive giraffe, we've modified the giraffe a little bit by telling us that it's massive. This is a typical example of using an adjective. Adjectives are classic modifiers. We put the adjective before the noun. The modifier before the modified. Very typical in English. Let's look at some more examples. Let's look at the phrase absolutely ridiculous. We have the modifier, absolutely, before the modified, ridiculous. Absolutely modifies ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. Goes before the modified. Okay, you're with me? Good. Most of the time, modifiers tend to come before the modified in English. It's one of those languages. Lots of examples. A very fast hippopotamus, an endless rant, eternal damnation, a coffee shop, and so on. Fast modifies hippopotamus, very modifies fast, very fast hippopotamus. Endless modifies rant, eternal modifies damnation, coffee modifies shop. What type of shop is it? It's a coffee shop, and so on. But sometimes, especially when they're more than just one or two words, these modifiers actually come after the modified. And this is most common with relative clauses. Examples. I was talking to some guy who wanted to sell me magazines about tarot cards. So I was talking to some guy who wanted to sell me magazines. Who wanted to sell me magazines is the modifier, and some guy is the modifier. We're talking mainly about the guy, not about the fact he wanted to sell me these terrible magazines. So yeah, the modifier comes after the modified. Another example, the house that Dan built. That Dan built is the modifier, and the house is the modified. We're talking mainly about the house, not Dan. Dan is just Dan building the house. That's just extra information. So yeah, all of these modifiers come after the modified. The house that Dan built, the person who wanted to sell me magazines about tarot cards before I told him to go away. So, in short, you tend to get modifiers both before and after the modified. This isn't a strict rule in English. They can occur either side of the modified. Okay, got it? Modifiers, modified, 80s action film. Now, let's go back to Hannah's example, the reduced relative clause. Brian, who wanted to make an impression on Anna, becomes Brian, wanting to make an impression on Anna, took her to a luxurious restaurant. Wanting to make an impression on Anna is the modifier, and what's it modifying? Brian. Brian is the modified. So, in this case, we've got the modifier after the modified, just like a relative clause, which makes sense because this is a reduced relative clause. So far, so good, right? No surprises. Cool, okay. But here is where Hannah has an issue. I'm going to quote her email again. I was confused when I tried changing the position of the reduced clauses by putting them before the nouns. She gives 2 examples of each. Brian, wanting to make an impression on Anna, took her to a luxurious restaurant. Or, wanting to make an impression on Anna, Brian took her to a luxurious restaurant. Okay. So yeah, this modifier can go before or after. Her other example, our old house, built in 1920, collapsed last year. Built in 1920, our old house collapsed last year. Same thing happening, right? The modifier just goes before. The reduced relative clause goes before or after. They both work. She says, Hannah says, the meaning of the whole sentence stays the same. But do you think that the reduced relative clauses now modify the verbs instead of the nouns? Or was I complicating it? And to that, I say yes. A very, very, very good question. She's right. Changing the position of the modifier here doesn't change the meaning of the sentence. It's still modifying the same thing, right? In this case, Brian, or our old house. There may be a stronger emphasis on the sentence as a whole in the second examples, but the modifiers can only refer to Brian or the house. Because only Brian wants in this sentence. Only the house was built in the second sentence. Does it emphasize different parts of the sentence? Well, that's a good question, and we will come back to that later as we get deep into this topic. At the moment, we're still just talking about grammar. It's going to get more rich, more heavy, more deep, more thick, more soupy, I hope. Let's see. But yeah, we'll come back to that. But this moving the modifier around, this whole thing about moving it before and after the modified, this made me think. So, English is a very, very obsessive language. It is totally mental about word order. If you move things around, even if they should make sense, it just sounds weird. And in English, everyone panics, word order is very, very strict in English compared to a lot of other languages. When we change the order of things, we usually end up with chaos. So how come this is okay? I mean, this is a big shift, right? We're moving a big modifier before and after something, and we have no cases anymore. So how can we tell what it's modifying? Well, there are 2 things that tell us what it's modifying. At least 2 things. Context and intonation. And maybe also things like facial expressions, eye contact, and gestures if you're in the room with the person you're talking to, or on Zoom. So, there's more than two things, isn't it? But context and intonation are major parts of this. But none of these things that really help us understand that we're talking about Brian come from grammar or syntax, from any sort of language code. How do we know we're still talking about Brian when we move this modifier? It's not language. It's not, well, it is language. It's not grammar. It's not syntax. And the more and more I read about language, the less of a system, like a kind of mathematical system, it feels to me. If you've listened to this podcast before, you're probably aware that I feel this way very strongly. We weren't born with this innate grammatical system that we just activated as we grew up. We evolved language. As humans evolved, we evolved language too. Not only did we evolve language, but language evolved with us. Our culture, our intonation patterns, our gestures, our facial expressions, our eye contact, and yes, our grammar too. It's not a forgotten part, it's just a small part. All of this stuff evolved together. And by the way, before I get any angry emails, especially from Chomskyists, this isn't all stuff I worked out myself. I am nowhere near smart enough for that. I wish I had come to these conclusions myself, but no, my brain is not big enough. These are the views of a lot of modern evolutionary linguists. This is stuff I've been reading a lot on recently, and I'm stating this as fact. This is obviously still in the air in the linguistics world, but so far I'm pretty convinced. And I've been reading a lot of this stuff recently, and it's probably why it made me think about Hannah's email so much. So let's dive into this a little deeper. One of my favourite linguists at the moment is Daniel Everett. He's in this field of evolutionary linguists, and one of my favourite quotes about language comes from him. This is the quote: "Language is exactly what the culture needs it to be." And this is what I think we're seeing in Hannah's email. Let's look at some more examples. If you say something like, Brian, wanting to make an impression on Anna, took her to a luxurious restaurant, you'll just know from context, from culture, that this is the same as wanting to make an impression on Anna, Brian took her to a luxurious restaurant. There's no confusion about what is the modifier and what's the modified, whether it goes before or after. We just know. In fact, there is no other interpretation of this sentence except that Brian is the one who wanted to make an impression. Like I said, only Brian can want something. Taking, the verb in the sentence, taking can't want. A luxurious restaurant can't want. And because of the context of the situation, Brian taking Anna to the restaurant, we know Anna doesn't want in this case. We make sense of this sentence despite the ambiguity. Our cultural knowledge, knowing that restaurants and verbs don't tend to desire things, and our contextual knowledge, figuring out that Brian is doing the wanting, do the work for us. Not the grammar. Not the speech side of language. It's not a good term. I can't think of a best term, but not the words and syntax and stuff like that. Not anything that you can actually point at within the sentence itself. It's outside the sentence. It's us that makes sense of this. Another example of this phenomenon, again, courtesy of Dan Everett, is the following sign. I'm going to read you a sign that you might see in a posh restaurant or a private members club, or somewhere basically where people really care too much about clothes. And there are too many of those places still. Anyway, the sign says, "No shirt, no tie, no service." What does it mean? No shirt, no tie, no service. Well, we know what it means. We can easily figure the meaning of this out. How? Well, not through grammar or syntax. There's practically no grammar in this sentence or syntax to speak of. Each sentence, I guess it's 3 sentences, each sentence or each clause, however you want to divide it, all three of them have the same syntax, have the same grammar. That's not going to help us get meaning from this. What helps us? Well, it's our shared cultural knowledge and common sense interpreting the context. And to some extent, also the way the speaker says the sentence. No shirt, no tie, no service. The intonation changes on the last one. That makes us understand what's going on. Not the grammar, not the syntax. No code here. It means, of course, if you haven't got there already, if you don't have a shirt or a tie, then you'll receive no service here. We know that the shirt and tie are the condition and that the service is the result, without the grammar, but with culture and context. And also, seriously, clothes are not that important, honestly. Anyway, that's by the by. Let's have fun and modify this sign a little. Let's go for the same syntax, but change it around a little. So remember the first sign, no shirt, no tie, no service, has no shirt, condition, no tie, condition, no service, result, right? Let's try a different sort of balance here. No homework, no TV, no candy. No homework, no TV, no candy. Again, exactly the same syntax and grammar, or lack of syntax and grammar, almost. But this time, it means if you don't do your homework, you won't get to watch TV and you won't have any candy. We know that the homework is the condition and that the TV and candy are the result. Without any help from grammar. Grammar is not being helpful at all here. It's all the same. Each sentence is exactly the same, grammatically speaking. But with a lot of help from our friend culture, and maybe some pronunciation clues, and even facial expressions, body language, eye contact, maybe a bit of pointing at the homework or pointing at the candy. The context gives us everything. Language is giving us nothing here. Or we could argue that the culture and the context is part of the language. I prefer that. It's more inclusive. Culture and context is a part of language. It evolved alongside it, and it informs what the language is. All right, okay, so why is this so important? Why am I getting upset? This is really geeky, isn't it? So what? Well, yeah, good question. How's this going to help anyone learning English? Well, I think it's worth thinking about this when we're learning a language. I see so many people getting bogged down with the mathematics of grammar, really getting deep into the nuances of grammar, sometimes at the expense of thinking about communication. And I get it. Looking at language like a code or a formula is safe and comfortable. I do it all the time, and I'm thinking about this stuff, but I still approach a lot of my Bulgarian like a system. But language really is just so much more messy and, thankfully, fun and human and context and culture driven than just some boring old system. A few episodes back, I talked about the Beatles and how the Beatles changed their sound over their career, starting off simple and basic and evolving into experimental and very elaborate areas, and then re-simplifying at the end of their career, but this time with a little maturity. And in that episode, I compared the Beatles' journey with learning English, that you improve and improve and improve technically speaking until you're almost too good, meaning that you're using the language too elaborately and too technically, and that you need to hit that final stage where you can make it simple again, but with the strongest and most effective communication. A lot of advanced learners of English kind of get stuck at this stage, this Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, Day in the Life sort of period of the Beatles. And this is why. Remember that as human beings, we're lazy. We want to speak less. We want to use less words. If the person you're speaking to has a lot of the same knowledge as you, then you don't have to use so many words. You don't have to make things complicated. It's why we have words like he and then and this, and phrases like you know who and the thingy and it happened again. Okay. We get it, right? Okay, language is more than just grammar. I'm honing the point in a little too much here. Okay, let's go back to Hannah and Hannah's sentences. Brian, It's becoming comical, isn't it? Brian, wanting to make an impression on Anna, took her to a luxurious restaurant. Or the alternative? Wanting to make an impression on Anna, Brian took her to a luxurious restaurant. I mean, they're definitely different sentences, right? So, what might lead someone to choose one of these sentences and not the other? Why would you say the first one, or why would you say the second one? There's a choice there, right? Somewhere. And in one of my replies to Hannah, I recommended her to look into the subjects of theme and rheme. What's theme and rheme? Good question. Let's talk about theme and rheme. A funny thing happened to me this morning. I woke up before my alarm and started to think about this podcast episode. It's quite nice, lying in bed in the morning, fresh head, and letting your thoughts organize themselves. Because actually, to be honest, when I was writing this, I kind of got in a bit of a muddle. It was not quite coming together. So, lying down and just thinking, doing nothing else but thinking is a good way of solving these problems. So after a bit of a think, not completely solving it, but feeling a bit more organized, I went to my terrace and sat down with my muesli and my cup of tea and started reading. And the very first sentence I read, this was complete coincidence. I mean, I read about language all the time, but the first sentence I read was this. The topic in most languages of the world precedes the comment. In other words, languages prefer to begin their sentences with shared or old information before giving new information. I'm going to read that again. It was just everything I'd just been thinking about in bed came together in these two sentences. The topic in most languages of the world precedes the comment. In other words, languages prefer to begin their sentences with shared or old information before giving new information. Click. Everything came together. This is the key to theme and rheme, which is the topic we're talking about. The writer, Dan Everett, it would not surprise you to know, was the writer of these sentences. He's not using the phrases theme and rheme, he's using the terms topic and comment. But for all purposes today, they're essentially the same. So, in a nutshell, theme is the first bit of a sentence, and rheme is the rest of the sentence. Theme is the topic, and rheme is the comment. Theme is basically, this is what I'm talking about. And rheme is basically, this is what I'm saying about it. It's like an announcement. Theme is like an announcement. Theme is like saying, okay, this is what we're talking about now. Like, let's look at some examples. You need to go over the hill and round the corner today. Okay, so you is the theme, and we're talking about you. Everything else is new information. This is the rheme. Over the hill and round the corner is where you need to go today. So over the hill and round the corner is the theme, and that's what we're talking about. This is the topic of the sentence or the clause. And the rheme is the new information. Today, you need to go over the hill and round the corner. Today is a theme, and we're talking about that. And the rheme is the new information. Another good example of seeing how this sort of functions is in passive sentences. When I was a new teacher, really young, I was like in my early 20s. I look back and it's a completely different guy. Bit of an idiot, actually, but I guess we were all idiots in our early 20s, maybe. Anyway, when I was a new teacher, one of my students, we were in the cafe on the top floor of this language school in Istanbul, and we were all sitting around a table, and it was the early 2000s, so everyone could smoke then. You could smoke anywhere. And we were sitting down, having a tea together, the whole class, and most people were smoking because, as I said, it was the early 2000s. And one of them said, "Teacher, why do we use the passive?" And it was like Okay, yeah, I wasn't really sure of an answer for that, but I just said, oh, well, yes, it's one of the nice things about English. It's, you could say, and I pointed to this guy, Ilias, who was smoking a cigarette. Ilias is smoking a cigarette, or the cigarette is being smoked by Ilias. It's just nice to have some choices, which is not bad for a 23-year-old, I guess. But it wasn't really the reason. It's not the best answer at all. There are lots of better answers than that. Most answers are better than that. But this is what I said. And there's some truth to it, I suppose. But when you think about the past, and I continued teaching in Istanbul for a long time, and I got better at being able to answer that question. And a lot of my knowledge came from course books that we used in the classes. And a lot of course books actually say, oh yeah, we use the passive when the subject isn't known or isn't important. Which is sometimes true, especially if the subject isn't known. But, that's not really the spirit of it, in my opinion. I think passives are used because we want to put something at the beginning of the sentence into the theme position or the topic position. We want to, if we're talking about, let's look at Ilias and the cigarette. If we're talking about Ilias and his cigarette, Ilias is smoking a cigarette, we're talking about Ilias, right? This is the topic of the conversation. And his smoking a cigarette is sort of new information. Why would we say the cigarette is being smoked by Ilias only if we happen to be talking about this particular cigarette? Maybe it's a magic cigarette. Maybe it's a pink cigarette. Maybe it's the cigarette that Samuel L. Jackson actually touched. So Ilias is now smoking some cigarette that's been touched by a major celebrity. Whatever, we're talking about the cigarette. And it's being smoked by Ilias is now the new information. That is why we would use the passive. More examples. They're building a massive bridge over the River Kay. All right, cool. Them is what we're talking about. They, we've got a pronoun here, so of course we already know who they are. The bridge building is what we're saying about them. But let's make it passive. A massive bridge is being built over the River Kwai. Now it's all about the bridge, baby. This is the topic of the sentence. Perhaps we were talking about it before, or perhaps theme or topic can be used to introduce and assert a new topic. Either way, they're building a massive bridge over the River Kay. We're talking about they. A massive bridge is being built over the River Kay. We're talking about the massive bridge. Okay, so there are lots of different types of theme. And I don't want to get bogged down into the details because the spirit of them is the most important takeaway, I think, from this podcast. The beginning of the sentence is usually what we're talking about, whether we've brought it up before or we're asserting a new topic. So, when we're talking or writing, we usually connect our ideas together between clauses and sentences, right? What is talking but just lots of different ideas jumping between two people? What is writing but lots of different ideas being pushed together into different paragraphs? What is other mediums? What's a presentation but lots of ideas organized in a linear way? What we say or write is related to what was said or written before it. Unless we're making a clean break and we're starting a new idea, which happens all the time too. Ideas are connected. And in a way, language is nothing more than just a bunch of ideas put together. So generally speaking, we make part of the rheme the next theme. Okay, so for example, really, really simple and artificial example. I went to Barbados last year, it snowed. Okay, I is the theme. I went to Barbados last year, it snowed. The last year in Barbados snowed. So this is, the next sentence starts with the rheme or the comment of the previous sentence. Another example. I can't stand it when you make that face. You look like Alexander Armstrong. Okay, so I can't stand it. I is the theme. When you make that face, I can't stand it when you make that face is the rheme. You look like Alexander Armstrong. You and your face are in the rheme of the first sentence. These are very artificial examples just to show you that we have this sort of rhythm that goes on with dialogues, with writing, with presentations. New information comes after the old information. Okay, so I thought it would be fun to analyze some real English and get some examples. So-called real English. I love that phrase, real English. How many companies have this, real English? How many YouTube videos have real English? Anyway, this is going to be some real English. Once you see this whole theme, rheme, topic, comment stuff happening, like now, you're going to start noticing it everywhere. When I started thinking about this podcast episode, I couldn't really listen to anyone or watch TV because I was just analysing where the theme and the rheme is whenever anyone was speaking. But anyway, I'm gonna give you that horrible curse as well. Let's listen to my mum and dad. Back in, I don't know when it was, about 2018, I did another blog post where I analysed, I interviewed my parents. Well, I didn't interview them. I just let them talk for about 5 minutes. And I analysed their language. We're going to do the same again. It's a different type of analysis because today we're looking at theme and rheme. And let's listen to the whole thing. We're going to listen to my mum and dad talk for about literally just 1 minute. And they're talking about their time at university. They met at university and they're talking about how it was and what it was like at university. So yeah, let's listen to my mum and dad, who are awesome. Shout out, Peter and Teresa. And yeah, let's hear them talk about their university days.
And I think universities now are not the same. They're not the same for all sorts of reasons.
Nor are we the same, as we both think. Yes, I changed my subject. I intended to do history and economics. And I was also seduced by politics. So it was partly because there were several very charismatic teachers there. Sammy Finer and Hugh Barrington and Jean Blondel.
And this does not happen with today's youth. When we went to university, we were a privileged 4%, or was it
something like
2%
yes.
of the age group?
Yes.
Now it's pushing 50%.
Yes.
We were given grants. We were well looked after. 3 meals a day on campus. Being a campus university was brilliant. You never had to fend for yourself, but in a way, you didn't grow up either.
No, that's true. In some ways, it was like a 7th form after a 6th form of school. Yeah. But nonetheless, looking back, it was the most important aspect of my education. I loved it, and it was the campus. There were only about 600 students in our time, and probably about 100 staff. And we were all living in this area, an old army camp, condemned buildings.
Okay, lovely stuff. Aren't they nice? They're really cool guys. Like my parents a lot. Anyway, so yeah, let's listen to what they said in more detail. Here is a section from that.
And I think universities now are not the same. They're not the same for all sorts of reasons.
Nor are we the same, as we both think.
This word nor is a really good example. So my mum said, I think universities now are not the same. They're not the same for all sorts of reasons. And my dad goes, nor are we the same as we were then. And this nor is is contrasting the universities with themselves. So that he's taking the rheme, universities, into his theme. More examples. Let's listen again.
Yes, I changed my subject. I intended to do history and economics, and I was also seduced by politics. So it was partly because there were several very charismatic teachers there. Sammy Finer and Hugh Barrington and Jean Blondel.
Yeah, here my dad is basically asserting a new topic. So again, theme doesn't have to always refer to something before. If you make something new with theme, you are creating a new topic. You're saying, hey, we're going to talk about this now. And yeah, he said, yes, I changed my subjects. I intended to... So He's talking about himself. And then his second sentence is, it was partly because there were several blah, blah, blah. And the it is about him changing his subject. So that's the rheme from before. You see the pattern here. It's really obvious when you start noticing it. Let's go for another example.
We were given grants. We were well looked after. 3 meals a day on campus. Being a campus university was brilliant. You never had to fend for yourself. But in a way, you didn't grow up either.
Okay, I like this one from my mum here. She asserts a new topic by saying we were given grants, we were well looked after. So we're talking about we now. And then she says 3 meals a day on campus. So 3 meals a day is basically talking about being looked after. We were well looked after, 3 meals a day on campus. And then she says being a campus university was brilliant. And again, she's taken the rheme from the sentence before, 3 meals a day on campus, being a campus university. So she's connecting that to the beginning and creating a new topic based on the old topic. You never have to fend for yourself. But in a way, you didn't grow up either. But in a way is contrasting you didn't have to fend for yourself, but in a way is now contrasting the rheme of the previous sentence. It's everywhere. You see it everywhere, really. Like the more you get used to how this works, the more you'll see it. But just noticing isn't enough, right? We'll come on to how we can actually use this in our lessons if you're a teacher, but more importantly as a learner, or even just as a person who wants to communicate more clearly, write more clearly, make better presentations. This is totally how we communicate. We produce an idea, or someone else produces an idea. You take it, we put it at the beginning of our next sentence or clause or utterance, and then we add something new. Makes sense. It's really obvious if you think about it. And that's why it's obvious, because we're humans, and this is how humans think. Language is nothing but a collection of ideas. So let's go back to Hannah. I'm going to answer Hannah's question. And the answer to Hannah's question, what difference does it make? That's not exactly what she was asking, but what difference does it make when you put the modifier before or after the modified in this case? Brian, wanting to make an impression on Anna, took her to a luxurious restaurant. Wanting to make an impression on Anna, Brian took her to a luxurious restaurant. How are these different? Well, it basically, I think, depends on the context and what was said before. These sentences are not in isolation. These sentences belong to a bigger text. Perhaps this is the beginning of a text, and that's okay. And if it is, it's asserting a new topic. And I think Brian, wanting to make an impression on Anna, took her to a luxurious restaurant. It feels like it's asserting a new topic. We've got a name at the beginning, not a pronoun. If there was a larger context, we might be using the word he, for example. But it also could be after talking about someone else, maybe, like Javid. We were talking about Javid for a minute, and now we're talking about Brian. So it becomes Brian, asserting I guess that's asserting a new topic. But the second sentence, wanting to make an impression on Anna, Brian took her to a luxurious restaurant. Perhaps we were talking about making an impression, or how much Brian likes Anna, or how he wants to impress her, or how difficult Anna may be to impress, or how much Anna likes being impressed. Wanting to make an impression on Anna being at the beginning of this sentence may be strongly related to what happened before. We don't know what happened before. These are probably made up sentences. What happened before doesn't exist, so we can only speculate. But none of that's too important right now, because what does this mean? What does this mean for you? What does this mean if you want to communicate better in English, or write better, or make better presentations, or do a TED talk sometime? Well, yeah, here's what I want to say about this. If you're giving a talk or a presentation, think about theme and rheme. Think about how these ideas work when you're planning your presentation. Think about how you can take one topic, give new information, take the new information and make that the next topic, and give new information about that. And this sort of dance, this sort of pattern will make your ideas in your presentation jump from one to another seamlessly and smoothly. If you're writing a report or an essay, everything will be clearer and easier to understand if you just think a little bit about theme and rheme beforehand. Take an idea, start with an idea, assert a theme, modify it, talk about it, give some information about it, take that new information, make that the new theme, and continue until your thought is complete, until the idea is full. And that is when you start a new paragraph. If you want to assert a new theme, if you want to move, pivot, probably that's a new paragraph. And finally, if you find yourself in one of those situations where you're having difficulty communicating with someone, you're just not clicking with each other, just take a minute to consider how your ideas are weighted in your clauses, your sentences, your utterances. Again, this theme rheme, this topic comment, this might solve your problem with communicating with someone who may be having communication difficulties themselves. All right, okay. Cool, we got deep. We got very deep there. But yes, that's what I wanted to talk about today. And thanks very much if you're still here. Send me an email especially if you disagree, or if you have any other questions like Hannah did. Some questions will make it to podcast episodes if they make me think ridiculously deeply enough about things like this one did. Thanks very much, and talk at you next time.